So thank you so much for all agreeing to come to the session. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming to this session. So what this is a Co-Create World Cafe interactive session looking at some of these case studies which we've been developing through Co-Create to explore the governance and environmental and social issues which may come up from plausible field experiments in the SAI, MCB, CCT, and sea ice thickening space. So what we're going to do here is explore these different case studies and then share this with the table facilitators, which you'll notice on each table. I'll come to the names in a minute. But so we're going to have a 15 to 20 minute start. I'm going to have a clock, and then we will then have a swap from your case study to another table, and I'll leave on the board who is changing, what table is moving to the next table, just to make it very clear. And so what you'll find in front of you is a two-sided handout of the case study. You'll see that on that handout there is the information and there are a few key considerations. On the back you will see a sort of a brief synopsis of the discussion of those case studies, and you will then see 3 to 4 key questions we want you to think about and key takeaways from those case studies. So the way the sessions will work will be that we spend 2 to 3 minutes briefly scanning through the document and then go through the questions and have a discussion. Your table facilitators will be making notes of the discussions that you guys have, and they will then share those ideas at the end to have a sort of synthesis of the conversations that have been had in the room and what you guys think and what you guys are concerned about and what you guys think are positive aspects of those case studies. Once the table facilitators have had a chance to share those comments, we will then have our session panelists, or session chairs or panelists, which are Ted Parsons, Pete Irvine, and Matthias Honegger at the end, if they are still here. And they will share with 3 to 5 minute sort of summaries of what they think of your comments, whether they're good, whether they're bad, whether they disagree. Maybe they agree. So just a brief summary, very brief summary. These are the case studies. And so what we're exploring here is as I said, SAI, SIT, sea ice thickening, CCT, and MCB. So case study 1 is a small-scale experiment in the Seychelles, which you can see there with the big 1. Case study 2 is a medium-scale sea ice thickening project in Nunavut in Canada, in Cambridge Bay. And case study 3 is a cirrus cloud thinning experiment over Arctic Norway. Case study 4 is a large-scale marine cloud brightening offshore Angola, and case study 5 is a large-scale stratospheric aerosol injection experiment in northern Finland. So your table facilitators on table 1 is Alistair Duffy from UCL. On table 2 is Bridget Shaker from Ocean Visions. Table 3, lucky table, it's me from UCL, Ben Roche. Table 4, Dante McGrath from University of Cambridge, and table 5, Jared Farley from Cornell University. And as I said, the conveners and chairs of this session are Pete Irvine and Ted Parsons and Matthias Honegger. They will be helping to run the conversations, making sure it's a smooth session. So please reach out and chat with them if you'd like. So these are the key things I want you to consider in this session. After 15 to 20 minutes, I will make us have a change. So I think the time now, we'll start this at 25 past. So I think let's aim for 2:40. I will make us have a change, and then we will go from there. Let's start having the conversations, and good to go. If there's any questions at this stage, please let me know, but no, brilliant, okay. Hello, guys. Hello. I can see everyone's had good in-depth conversations, which is great. But unfortunately, it's now going to be time to swap case studies, if that's okay. Stop case study talking, swap case studies now, please. So, people on table 1, so that is... Sorry, everyone happy now? Sorry, yeah, okay, cool. Right, so if table 1, everyone, if you could leave your papers there and head to table 4. Where's table 4? That's table 4, brilliant. Oh, that's fine, but please leave it. Yeah, that's fine. Table 4, if you could move to table 2. Table 2, could you put your hand up? Yep, so you guys will move over there. Table 3, which is you guys here, you are swapping with table 1, okay? Table 4 to table 2, and then table 5 and table 3. Wait, sorry, I've got confused it. You guys. Okay, if we could close up now for our conversations. Brilliant. Okay, thank you so much for being really engaging, guys. That was really, really nice to have these conversations and these diverse points of view. So I think the best way to do this might be if we actually just bring the facilitators up here so that they can go one by one, table by table. So Ali, if you'd like to come up. Sorry? And if we could try and, I'm sure we've now all had a chance, so if we could try and just highlight the key things, 2 minutes or something like that would be great.
Yeah. So, people won't have seen the case study, right? So we were talking about a smaller scale equatorial SAI experiment. So we're talking about 10 to 100 kilograms H2SO4 being put into the stratosphere via balloons in the Seychelles. This is being described as the Seychelles hosting this experiment, which we took to mean that this is kind of a scientific project led by someone not from the Seychelles, but presumably with some local hosting from scientific institutions there. And we were discussing things like what constitutes appropriate stakeholder engagement, whether the local vulnerability to climate change influences the response, discussions of legal frameworks. Okay, our first group had an interesting discussion. It was noted that this is kind of similar to the scale that Make Sunsets have been releasing. It was noted that essentially this has zero direct environmental risks, but a big discussion point was the fact that much opposition is not influenced by the direct environmental risks or the risks to local people, but by feelings of slippery slopes and feelings of having some control early in the road to deployments, such as to prevent SRM at global scales. I think it was also a big point of discussion for the stakeholder engagement that, actually, is it possible to do meaningful stakeholder engagement in an environment where people don't know enough about this topic? And certainly from the Make Sunsets experience, Andrew described actually how that can be a difficult process. If people don't know anything about this, actually, how do you really have that conversation? It was also pointed out that really there are no rules in this sense. Like there is not a international existing legal framework to use. And so the answer to that question is fairly straightforward. I think we also had a lot of discussion around kind of symbolism, the fact that this small-scale deployment is interpreted symbolically rather than practically, right? And that's a big, important point for how people are going to respond. Anyone chime in? Anyone have I missed things? No?
We talked about this wasn't my point, but I thought it was a great point, which is it is like ethically preferred. It is ethically much better to involve local stakeholders, but it is also strategically very important because the conversations of people in the place where you would do any work, the conversations that need to happen should happen between people in the community and local scientific knowledge. And so when you go to do small-scale experiments like this, reaching out to local scientists and academic community is very important, ethically and strategically.
Yeah, cool. Anyone from group 1 want to come in as well, actually? The first group.
I mean, that's not how we've done it, obviously. So, right, like, it's...
We can make that up, is this all right? Can we move on, I think? So just on
Move on, sure.
Right, we can maybe continue the conversation.
Yeah, of course.
Great, thank you so much, Table 1. I'd like to add hosting in Seychelles. Under UN clause, the host is liable, the host nation, so in that case, Seychelles would be liable for any transboundary effects, which is a consideration which will be needed for any kind of these experiments. So if we go to Table 2 now, please.
Okay, I'll try and summarize our two groups quickly. I should have brought. Here's what we're doing. Okay. Our table was looking at a case study of sea ice thickening in the Arctic. So this is the non-atmospheric example. And so the case study was looking at pumping seawater onto the surface of a 1 kilometer squared area using about 300 wind-powered pumps, and to assess the feasibility and effectiveness of ice thickening. Okay, so we had quite a few conversations about how this is important in its own right for discussion, but also how it could be connected to other SRM approaches. So we were discussing, in terms of community involvement, how the importance of who chooses the site and whether the community is involved is important, and thinking about the local benefits beyond just potentially this tool as adaptation, but also jobs and other things like that being important. And then also the importance of a difference between the community being passively okay with the experiment versus actually wanting it, and how that is not just a difference for the research, but a complete difference in mentality. And that this kind of work and doing the work of building relationships can build the groundwork for other kinds of research, and set a precedent. But then we also talked about how there are differences in the perception of an approach that it can be thought of as local adaptation versus having broader climate impacts, and where to draw the line in terms of mentality and also actual work. So actually similar to lots of other SRM conversations. And the importance of needing to answer questions at smaller scales before moving up to larger scales. And so there was a question on our sheet about, should this move up to larger scales? And there was a lot of emphasis on first answering, could it, before deciding if it should. And finally, thinking about tying the work from the actual work into governance frameworks, and that needs to be a very active process, and that parts of the research need to be involved in informing policymakers, and also taking advantage of local involvement and, in particular, local leadership on the research to help with moving governance forward.
Thank you so much. And then case study 3, for those of you who didn't get a chance to experience it, this is a small-scale cirrus cloud thinning experiment in Arctic Norway, releasing up to 100 kilograms of ice-nucleating particles, just to thin the cirrus clouds and allow more long-wave radiation to escape into space, raising questions about categorization of experiments. Should CCT be governed differently from the currently active cloud seeding operations which happen around the world? Indigenous engagement and comparisons with polar governments in other places. So essentially, we explored the Norwegian legal aspects, which is interesting how it differs from the European context, as it is not part of the European Union. And we had discussions about what scale does stakeholder engagement become critical. Is this a dangerous experiment because of the fact it's only releasing sort of tens of kilograms of material, or is it a case that stakeholder engagement is critical regardless of scale, even if very small amounts of material are being released? Is this the same as weather modification? Does it need a different governance protocol? This experiment would be confined to within the geography of Norway. It would not have any transboundary issues. So it is similar in that aspect to weather modification. However, this is aiming to change the climate in its local sense. So does it need to be governed differently? With stakeholder engagement, how do you communicate with the Sami who are living in the area, who are traditional sort of reindeer herders and things like that? But in this case, let's focus specifically on the reindeer herders. Whilst they might be suspicious of such activities, there are also tangible local benefits offered by CCT, potentially, such as the fact that this could allow for localized cooling, which may be beneficial for their herds, reindeers, and in these areas where increased heating through Arctic amplifications occurring, perhaps there is interest in these benefits. So there is this requirement for buy-in from the SAMI for all operations, but perhaps there might be interest in doing it. So finally on CCT, there are sort of more uncertainties to resolve here than SAI or for an MCB. Does that make it more dangerous, or does that make it, or in that sense, does that make it a more valuable experiment to undertake? So these were the key takeaways. So yeah, thank you. Good, Dante.
Hi, folks. So case study 4 was concerning marine cloud brightening, and specifically off the coast of Angola, where there's said to be a high concentration of the right clouds, effectively. And so we had some really energetic conversations about this case study, and just condensing it to 4 main points. A key question that came up in both conversations was who's involved in the research? Is it one institution? Is it a consortium? Is it a nation? Is it a government-funded scheme? The details are important in terms of who's involved, because then the question becomes what governance exists internally, and then as a consortium, because that might present some red flags as far as the intentions and the scope of the studies. The second point was concerning scale, and just really honing in on how small is small and how large is large. And in this context, it's relevant because there's the potential for transboundary effects based on the concentration of aerosols. So were this to be a larger scale experiment, it may have implications on South America and the Amazon basin, but establishing the scale is key to allaying concerns when it comes to transboundary effects. The third point that came up that resonated with the groups was liability. So when it comes to testing with multiple spraying vessels, and the case study suggested between 1 and 10, we need to know who owns those vessels and who's liable if things go wrong, and who accepts the blame for unintended consequences. So that needs to be ironed out well before they head out to sea. And finally, a common thread here in all case studies is communication is key. And indeed, I mean, from this morning's plenary, I think it was key to, it was obvious that the risks of conflating one technology with another. And so framing this as a geoengineering experiment might lead to connotations with another technology. I mean, so what is proposed here in terms of marine cloud brightening has stark differences to what is considered for SAI as far as impacts and transboundary effects. And so the framing is key, and we've seen successful case studies, specifically on the Great Barrier Reef, when it comes to framing the research based on coral bleaching and being one of many approaches that they're testing to approach a problem. So that was a recurring theme, the danger of blurring the lines when it comes to one technology or another. So if anyone else wanted to chip in from the groups that I've missed, otherwise I'm getting the wrap up, so thank you.
Alrighty, I think I'm the last case study. Our case study was on a larger scale, high latitude stratospheric aerosol injection experiment where 1,000 tons of SO2 was released from aircraft flying out of Finland. And there was a lot of discussion about this. A lot of the discussion was based on stakeholders and who counts and who are the stakeholders for this. Everyone could agree on the airport, but from there it evolved from the general public of the Arctic nations, the indigenous people, the government leaders, all the way out to the global community at large. And a large part of this discussion is its context in the broader scope of things as well, especially during the first group, of how did we get to this point? How did we choose Finland? How was it part of a larger infrastructure of agreement of countries that have decided to do this experiment, and then Finland volunteered as the research site? Or was it a sort of a unilateral decision? And is it a one part of a phase that slowly scales up and potentially leads to a deployment down the line? And are there necessary stop measures and exit ramps in place in order to stop it from happening? Or is this a singular experiment, not part of any larger experiment scheme? And then a lot of parallels drawn between different regulations and different central organizations. Let me know if I forgot anything.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. Right. So I know we're obviously right on the edge of time. Oh, 4 minutes ago. Brilliant. So if I can now please just invite up Ted, Pete, Matthias, just to have some final closing words. If you got, sorry, I know we're a bit tight on time, but it'd be great to have some final closing words.
So I gather our charge is to identify themes that cut across the groups. So I'm going to do that and find a couple. One in both, actually in all groups. I was struck by the extent to which not just this conversation, but all conversations around geoengineering research governance jump right to stakeholders, and they jump over the entire world of relevant policy, law, and regulation. And depending upon where you're doing it, there can be a lot of that stuff, and it can be constraining and extremely helpful. If you need a permit to do your experiment, and there's sort of regulatory requirements you have to meet, then that sort of comes prior to any sort of universal consultative obligation. Moreover, in a lot of jurisdictions that have strong indigenous populations, there exist formalized structures for indigenous consultation within governance and public policy. Those are also extremely helpful in identifying the parameters and requirements for such consultation. They don't necessarily take you all the way, but to skip over them is very strange. It's kind of as if an assumption that this research takes place in places where there is no governance. There are just like 10 million individuals operating by universal direct democracy, and I don't know anywhere in the world that works that way. Two, often the critiques don't pertain to local impacts. They are larger scale, global, and more dependent upon policy assumptions about what happens thereafter. Those are different depending upon the place that you're thinking about doing it. And so the thing I got from these two conversations was just, in cases where the primary concerns are larger scale than the jurisdiction, just be really careful you're not jurisdiction shopping for easy, tolerant places to do what you want to do to make it easy, but are actually engaging responsibly with a place that has a kind of a functioning set of requirements. Local partners who are respected and relevant are helpful whatever you want to do and wherever you want to do it. And a lot of questions about the permissibility and requirements for doing it have to do with honestly identifying whether there are pathways toward local benefits that would follow from the research that you're trying to do. The analogy to clinical trials came up a couple of times, and the requirements for local benefits. So the cirrus thinning in Norway was interesting in that deployment not much bigger than the experiment might plausibly bring local benefits if the thing works at all, which is an open question, right? In SAI, local benefits kind of depend upon assumptions about the thing going to global scale deployment at climatically relevant intensities, and so reducing climate impacts. That's a different pathway, and you need to be honest about that. That's all I got.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And Pete, do you want to come up?
Yeah, so thanks a lot. I thought this is part of a broader co-create effort, which is thinking about governance for SRM as part of a European Commission effort. And this is sort of building on work that we did in another workshop where we identified these plausible field experiments and chose them in such a way that they span a range of different technologies, a range of different scales, a range of jurisdictions and geographies. And the thought was they might raise different issues depending on those factors. And I think that's been clear that you've identified different questions, different issues, and I think it's been a really interesting and thoughtful discussion. I've not really got anything else to add, but maybe Matthias does.
Yeah, closing remarks from Matthias, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks, Pete, you made the point that I was going to make first, so I'll jump right to the second one, which is about, I think, a shared theme that we had were communication challenges already at the stage of describing what the object is, what the experiment or the test constitutes and what its purpose is. I think the way this was written up, especially by Ben and colleagues, was fairly clear, but still questions come up naturally about who the actors are, who the funding is from, what their respective governance structures are that actually led to a decision to support a certain type of research, and so on and so forth. So I think communication challenges are quite ubiquitous in this area, because speaking about research with broad audiences and regulators and other types of decision makers naturally encounters certain language or other barriers in a sense of shared understandings of what's going on and what the purpose might be. And in terms of purpose, one theme that at this table in particular struck me was this issue of who the intended beneficiaries would be, and the fact that when we look at something that happens locally and that is intended for local benefit, this is sort of, or naturally by definition, falling under the definition of adaptation. And we have a very different set of expectations when it comes to figuring out what kinds of adaptation work and what kinds don't. Obviously, there's errors there as well, and try and error in policy more generally. But that's a very different set of expectations versus doing something locally with the expectation of scaling it to a global effect or even just a regional effect, which no longer has a very well-defined set of stakeholders and thereby changes the entire premise of the endeavor from the beginning. And so clarity on the purpose of an activity is absolutely crucial in order to have a clear frame of reference on the engagement procedures, the participatory procedures, or expectations more broadly, and potentially even the legality, although intent is, again, something that's quite tricky to capture. But obviously, when we think about research funders' processes, intent of a research proposal is the key of a proposal, is to say, what do we intend to learn? And actually the activities that lead to that lesson are sometimes secondary, if only judged by their credibility of actually leading to that learning outcome. So yeah, I'm glad to have seen this discussion. I think it's been very productive, and we'll take it on, I think, at Co-Create to feed into the development of guidelines and principles at the end.
Yes, absolutely. And I want to say a massive thank you to everyone here, because on the 6th of June, we will be presenting this in a webinar for Co-Create, which is on LinkedIn. So your comments are all going to really help to actually give us a nice, exciting webinar then. So a bit of a weird session, I know. Thank you all so much for being so engaging. It's been really fun to talk with you. So yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much.